Hey YouTube family, it's Mrs. Rains here. I'm here with a video as promised with the sermon notes. I apologize. I thought this was going to be yesterday's video, but then I realized it's today's video when I checked my notes. So I wanted to shoot this video to kind of continue the series where we've been talking about David's ride to the kingship. He's been on a rough ride for about 10 years now, and we're coming to the end of his time on the run. And we're also coming to the end of Saul's life and Saul's reign. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 28, and there's a couple things I wanted to start off with. These are things that our pastor mentioned, but I wanted to also share is that what we need to see here is that choices that David has made prior to becoming king, these things are going to have long-lasting effects in his life, in the life of his wives, in the life of his children, and in the life of the Israelites who are going to be under his reign. And also, we need to see that a true love for God's word is shown in total obedience to his word. And that comes from 1 John 5:2-3. And what that basically is saying is that you can tell a tree by its fruit. And David was not completely surrendered to the Lord yet, even though he had been through all these trials and had been living in caves and on the run, and Saul's, trying to kill him. He clearly did not realize how much, how obvious it was he was in disobedience. He had gone out and become a bandit. He'd become a liar, a thief, a murderer, and these things are going to come back to haunt him. So as a believer, we have to understand that the things that we do clearly affect us and those around us. The choices I make as a mother are going to affect my children and my children's children, and the choices that were made by my parents have affected me, and this goes on and on and on. It's a cycle that does not stop, so we need to realize that, and then we need to try to be in obedience for that reason, if not for the fact that we love the Lord so much we want to be in obedience. Another thing I want to mention is that God is not mocked. He allows things, and we reap what we sow. He's going to allow David to do some things and make some choices because, David has to still learn. And he knows that even though David's a man after, God's own heart, he still has to learn his way. And a lot of this, we tend to forget that when David was told he was going to be king, he was a teenager. He was a young boy at the time. So these 10 years, he's now come into being a man. And you have to remember, young men, especially from the late teens into the late 20s, that young demographic, they're usually very hot-headed and macho and maybe a little bit rambunctious and hard to manage and all these different things because you have some hormonal things going on. And I'm sure if you're watching this video and there's a man in your life or a young man in your life, you can totally relate to what I'm saying. So in chapter 28, we see that Saul is now run amok as well, because it tells us in verse 3, Samuel was dead, and all Israel mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the mediums and spiritists from the land, because Saul was cleaning up house. He was basically not getting any good information from anyone. Samuel's died, they mourn, and now he's got to kind of be on his own. And the problem is now that even though that this medium is gone, these mediums are gone, Saul now looks for a medium because he realizes Samuel's gone. I don't have anybody to inquire of. None of the people around him, all of his yes men have kind of fallen away. And so now you have a situation where Saul is going to look for a medium. Now, he doesn't know where these mediums are because he cast them out, but he begins to inquire of those around him. And lo and behold, his servants speak up and say, we know where you can find a medium. She's at Endor. And so this begs to question, if you're with some people and they're around you and these people claim to be friends and they claim to be, a help to you, they should not wantonly and easily know where to find sin. Of course, Saul doesn't think of this. So they tell him to go to Endor. He goes to Endor. They find him, the woman, and he says to her, I want you to consult a spirit for me. Well, the woman says, well, you sure you want to do this? Because Saul has said, I'm forbidden to do such a thing. And he said, oh, you won't get in trouble. And mind you, at this time, he is disguised. So, of course, she doesn't realize he is the king. So she goes on and she conjures up this spirit. And she said, I see an old man, and he's walking towards me, blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out it's Samuel. She immediately recognizes it's Samuel, and she says, oh my goodness, you've deceived me. You are Saul. And, you know, it's kind of like, he's like, well, tell me what is being said. And, you know, she goes on and tells her, you know, makes the link. And then now Samuel is speaking directly to Saul. And he goes off on him basically. And he says, hey, why do you consult me now that the Lord's departed from you and become your enemy? What he's basically saying is, you wouldn't consult me when I was alive because you wanted to. He basically told Samuel, I'm gonna kill you if you say anything negative to me. So he's like, you don't want my consultation when I'm alive, but now you want to consult me when I'm dead because the Lord's departed from you. And then he says, he no longer answers either by prophets or dreams, so I've called on you to tell me what to do. So he basically tells him, look, I get it, you're right, but I need help. Tell me what to do. So Samuel says to him that because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. And the Lord also will give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistine. So Samuel is speaking from the grave saying, tomorrow you're going to be dead and so are your two sons. So Saul is now being told it's the end of the end. Of course, he freaks out and he starts having a temper tantrum because it tells us that he immediately fell to full length on the floor, filled with fear because of Samuel's words. His strength was gone, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. So he basically fell out all over the floor. Okay, he's all upset. He's gotten this bad news, and he has refused to eat, of course. And then Saul has a habit of this, because if you remember a few chapters back, he tells his men don't eat anything, because he's not going to eat anything until he finds David, which is crazy because you need the food for strength. But of course, he's out of his mind, so he's not thinking of this. And then he says to himself that, you know, and this is all because he consulted Samuel because the Philistines are coming for him, and he knew this. At the beginning of the chapter, it tells us that King Achish goes to David and says, hey, I'm going to go fight the Israelites, because that's what the Philistines were all about. They were about fighting and taking what they wanted. They were basically raiders. And so Achish tells David, hey, you're going to go out raiding with me, and I'm expecting you to join my army. And David, of course, relents because he's not expecting to have to do this. So you have David out of sorts, and he's torn because now he's got to go up in arms against his own people, or at least he's got to pretend to, for the sake of the Philistines not turning on him as well. And then you have Saul, who's completely nuts, refusing to eat, having a tantrum, all these things. So the woman, this is the medium at Endor, she had a fattened calf at the house, which she butchered at once, took some flour, kneaded it, baked bread without yeast. She set it before Saul and his men, and they ate. That same night, they got up and left. I believe they got up and left because there was no point in denying the obvious. And the obvious being that the Philistines were going to come for them, that Saul was going to be a dead man. He's a dead man walking. His two sons were going to die. And Samuel has already told him this. And Samuel has not been wrong all the years of his, being a prophet in Israel. And, I think that Saul knows this. He's like, the jig is up. I'm basically done for. And I do believe that it's important for the Bible to tell us that Saul gets this fattened calf and this bread, because even if you think of even modern day times when someone is going to be executed, they get a final meal. So the word tells us that he got this meal, and he's refreshed enough to keep moving, even though it's the end of the end. So I think that this chapter is kind of getting us kind of geared up for what's going to happen. We're coming to the end of Saul's life, and we're coming to the beginning of David being seated on the throne, and kind of moving on through the rest of this chapter and on to 2 Samuel, where we talk more about David's life and David's children. And so it's an interesting topic. I love reading about David because he was a man after God's own heart, but he made some fatal mistakes that we learn from. It's important to learn from other people's mistakes. So I hope you're enjoying this series. I hope that you are well and able to read ahead so that we can come again with the next set of sermon notes. But again, put God ahead of all you do. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you on the next one.